The sun was setting over the small town of Willow Creek, casting long shadows across its quiet streets. It wasn't the kind of place where much happened, just a sleepy little community surrounded by fields and forests. Most people liked it that way. But lately there had been tension in the air, something unusual for such a peaceful spot. The source of this unease? A growing divide between the local police department and the soldiers stationed at Fort Harrison, a military base. Just outside of town, Officer Jack Miller pulled his patrol car to a stop near the edge of Main Street. He adjusted his hat and leaned back in his seat, letting out a sigh. Jack had been on duty for 8 hours already, and he was tired. Tired of dealing with complaints, tired of hearing about how unfair the police were, and especially tired of what he called the new rules. In Jack's mind, things used to be simpler. You followed orders, kept order, and didn't let emotions get in the way. But now, everything felt different. People questioned him constantly, and he didn't like it one bit. Jack's thoughts were interrupted when his radio crackled to life. "Unit 4, we've got a report of suspicious activity near Maple Lane," came the voice of dispatch. Jack frowned as he grabbed the receiver. Maple Lane was close to the border of Fort Harrison, where civilians rarely ventured unless they had business with the base. It wasn't uncommon for tensions to flare up around that area either. Some of the locals didn't trust the soldiers, and some of the soldiers didn't trust the locals. Jack himself wasn't fond of them. He thought they acted like they owned the place, driving their big trucks through town and expecting everyone to salute them. "I'm on it," Jack replied gruffly before turning on his siren and heading toward Maple Lane. As he drove, he couldn't help but mutter under his breath, probably just another soldier thinking they're above the law. When Jack arrived, the street was deserted. There were no cars, no pedestrians, nothing out of the ordinary. He parked his car and stepped out, scanning the area. That's when he saw her, a woman standing near the curb speaking into her phone. She looked calm, dressed casually in jeans and a jacket. Her dark hair fell loosely over her shoulders and she seemed completely unaware of his presence. Jack approached cautiously, his hand resting instinctively on the holster of his gun. "Evening, ma'am," he said loudly enough to catch her attention. The woman turned, lowering her phone. She looked surprised but not alarmed. "Can I help you?" she asked politely, her tone steady. "I could ask you the same thing," Jack replied, narrowing his eyes. "What are you doing out here?" The woman hesitated for a moment before answering. "I live nearby. I was visiting a friend who lives on this street. Now I'm waiting for my ride." Her voice carried authority, the kind of confidence that made Jack uneasy. "ID?" Jack demanded, holding out his hand. He didn't care if she sounded sure of herself. Something about her rubbed him the wrong way. She reached into her pocket and pulled out her wallet, flipping it open to reveal a badge. "Lieutenant Colonel Maria Alvarez, Fort Harrison," she said firmly. "Is there a problem, officer?" Jack froze for a second, taken aback. Not only was she a soldier, but she outranked most of the men stationed at the base. Still, instead of backing down, his frustration boiled over. "You shouldn't be wandering around here without letting anyone know," he snapped, ignoring her rank entirely. "People have reported seeing strangers in this area." Maria raised an eyebrow. "I told you, I'm visiting a friend, and I'm standing right here, clearly not doing anything wrong. Is this how you treat all citizens, or is it just because I'm Latina?" Her words hit a nerve, and Jack's face flushed red. Whether it was embarrassment or anger, he couldn't say, but suddenly he felt the urge to assert control. Without thinking, he unholstered his gun and pointed it at her. "Don't try to play the victim card with me," he growled. "You're the one acting suspicious." Maria's expression shifted from irritation to shock. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then slowly she raised her hands, palms facing outward. "Officer, put your weapon down," she said evenly, though her voice betrayed a hint of fear. "This isn't necessary." But Jack wasn't listening. His finger hovered dangerously close to the trigger as he glared at her. "Maybe next time you'll think twice about walking around like you own the place." Unbeknownst to either of them, a neighbor watching from their window had started recording the scene on their phone. The video quickly spread online, capturing every word and gesture. By morning, the entire country would see the footage of Officer Jack Miller pointing his gun at Lieutenant Colonel Maria Alvarez, an act that would change both their lives forever. For now, though, the standoff continued. Maria stood her ground, refusing to show weakness despite the danger. After what felt like an eternity, Jack finally lowered his weapon, muttering something under his breath about filing a report. He returned to his car and sped off, leaving Maria shaken, but determined to hold him accountable. As the night wore on, the impact of Jack's actions began to ripple outward. Back at Fort Harrison, news of the incident reached Maria's commanding officer, who immediately launched an investigation. Meanwhile, in Willow Creek, whispers of outrage spread among the townspeople. Some defended Jack, claiming he was just doing his job, while others condemned his behavior as racist and reckless. By the time dawn broke over Willow Creek, the story had already gone viral, sparking debates across social media and news outlets nationwide. For Jack, the consequences would be swift and severe. For Maria, it marked the beginning of a fight not just for justice, but for understanding and change. Neither of them realized yet how deeply this moment would shape their futures, or how intertwined their paths would become. And so, in a small, Texas town where nothing ever seemed to happen, a single act of prejudice set off a chain reaction that would leave no one untouched. The morning after the incident, Willow Creek woke up to a storm. Not the kind of storm that brought rain or wind, but one made of words, angry words, shocked words, and demands for justice. The video of Officer Jack Miller pointing his gun at Lieutenant Colonel Maria Alvarez had spread like wildfire overnight. By sunrise, it was everywhere, on social media, news websites, and even national television. People couldn't stop talking about it. At Fort Harrison, Maria sat in her office staring at her phone. Her hands trembled slightly as she scrolled through the endless stream of comments. Some messages praised her bravery, calling her a hero for standing up to injustice. Others were cruel, filled with hate and insults aimed at her ethnicity. It was overwhelming. She hadn't expected this much attention. All she'd wanted was to visit a friend and go home. Now she felt like the center of a hurricane. Her commanding officer, Colonel Richard Hayes, knocked gently on her door before stepping inside. "Maria," he said, his voice calm but firm. "How are you holding up?" She looked up, forcing a small smile. "I've been better, sir." Colonel Hayes nodded, pulling up a chair across from her desk. "This situation is complicated. We're doing everything we can to support you, but I need to know how you want to proceed. Do you want to press charges?" Maria hesitated. Pressing charges meant going public, testifying in court, and reliving the moment when Jack's gun was pointed at her. But it also meant holding him accountable for what he'd done. After a long pause, she nodded. "Yes, sir. I think it's important. If nothing else, maybe this will make people realize how serious these issues are." Colonel Hayes gave her an approving look. "Good. You won't be alone in this. We'll provide whatever resources you need." Meanwhile, back in Willow Creek, Jack Miller was feeling the weight of his actions. Word had gotten around quickly among the police department, and his colleagues weren't happy. Some officers avoided him altogether, while others shot him disapproving glances whenever they passed him in the hallway. Even his supervisor, Captain Laura Bennett, seemed distant when she called him into her office. "Jack," she began, folding her arms across her chest. "You know I have to suspend you pending investigation, right?" He clenched his jaw, nodding stiffly. "Yeah, I figured." "This isn't just about you anymore," Laura continued, her tone sharp. "It's about the entire department. People are watching us, judging us, and honestly, they're not wrong to question whether we deserve their trust." Jack shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He wanted to argue, to tell her that he was just doing his job, but deep down, he knew that wasn't true. What he'd done went beyond protocol. It was personal. Still, admitting that felt impossible. Instead, he muttered, "I didn't mean for any of this to happen." Laura sighed, shaking her head. "Intentions don't matter here, Jack. Actions do. Until this gets sorted out, you're on leave. Don't come back until I say so." As Jack left the station, he could feel eyes on him. Reporters had gathered outside, shouting questions and shoving microphones in his face. He ignored them, climbing into his car and speeding away. His mind raced as he drove, replaying the events of the previous night over and over again. He kept coming back to Maria's words. Is this how you treat all citizens? Or is it just because I'm Latina? Those words haunted him, though he refused to admit why. By midday, the story had reached national news outlets. Talk shows debated whether Jack's actions were racially motivated, while opinion pieces poured in from every side. Some defended him, claiming he was being unfairly targeted because he was a police officer. Others argued that his behavior was proof of systemic racism within law enforcement. The controversy only grew louder when evidence surfaced, showing that Jack had a history of complaints against him, all involving racial bias. One of those complaints came from a local woman named Emily Dawson. She agreed to speak with a journalist, recounting an encounter she'd had with Jack 2 years earlier. According to Emily, Jack had pulled her over for no apparent reason, searched her car without cause, and made derogatory remarks about her mixed-race family. At the time, she'd filed a complaint, but nothing had come of it. Now, her story added fuel to the fire, painting Jack as someone who used his authority to intimidate minorities. Back at Fort Harrison, Maria tried to focus on her work, but it was hard. Everywhere she went, people recognized her. Some saluted her, others thanked her, and a few whispered behind her back. It was exhausting. To cope, she leaned on her closest friend, Ryan Carter, a fellow officer who had known her since basic training. You don't have to do this alone, you know, Ryan told her one evening as they walked along the base's perimeter. If you need a break, take it. No one would blame you. Maria shook her head. I can't. This isn't just about me anymore, it's bigger than that. If I step back now, it sends the message that I'm okay with letting things slide, and I'm not. Ryan nodded, understanding her determination. Just promise me you'll take care of yourself. You've already been through enough. That night, Maria lay awake in bed staring at the ceiling. She thought about Jack, wondering what kind of person he really was. Was he truly racist, or had he acted out of fear and ignorance? She didn't know, and part of her didn't care. What mattered most was making sure something like this never happened again, to her or anyone else. As the days turned into weeks, the investigation into Jack's conduct intensified. Internal Affairs reviewed his record, interviewed witnesses, and examined the viral video frame by frame. Meanwhile, the district attorney announced that criminal charges would be filed against him. The charge? Aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, a felony that carried a maximum sentence of 3 years in prison. When Jack heard the news, he felt a mix of emotions: anger, disbelief, and a gnawing sense of dread. He knew he'd messed up, but prison? That seemed extreme. Desperate for advice, he reached out to his older brother, Steve, who lived in another state. Listen, Jack, Steve said over the phone, his voice firm but sympathetic. You dug yourself into this hole, and now you've got to deal with the consequences. But if you want to get through it, you're going to have to own up to what you did. Denying it or blaming others isn't going to help. Jack frowned, gripping the phone tightly. I didn't point my gun at her because of her race, I swear. Steve sighed. Maybe not entirely, but you can't deny that race played a role even if you didn't mean for it to. Think about it, Jack. Really think about it. After hanging up, Jack sat in silence, his brother's words echoing in his mind. For the first time, he allowed himself to consider the possibility that he might have been wrong, not just legally, but morally. It was a painful realization, one that left him feeling hollow and unsure of who he was. While Jack wrestled with his conscience, Maria prepared for the legal battle ahead. Her lawyers assured her that the evidence was strong, but she knew the trial wouldn't be easy. Public opinion was divided, and some people still believed Jack's version of events. She also worried about the toll it would take on her personally. Every day she received messages, some supportive, others hateful, and each one chipped away at her resolve. To find balance, Maria threw herself into community service. She volunteered at local schools, spoke at town hall meetings, and organized workshops aimed at improving communication between civilians and the military. These efforts helped remind her why she'd chosen this path in the first place, to serve and protect, not just with a uniform, but with compassion and integrity. The trial date approached. Tensions in Willow Creek reached a boiling point. Protesters gathered outside the courthouse holding signs that read, "Justice for Maria and support our troops." Counter-protesters showed up too, carrying banners that defended law enforcement and accused Maria of exaggerating the incident. The town, once peaceful and quiet, now felt like a battleground. Through it all, Maria remained focused. She knew the outcome of the trial wouldn't change overnight, but she hoped it would spark a larger conversation, one that addressed the root causes of prejudice and inequality. As for Jack, he faced the reality of his choices, knowing that whatever happened next would shape the rest of his life. Neither of them could have predicted how far-reaching the impact of that single night would be, or how intertwined their futures would become. But one thing was certain: the road ahead would be challenging, transformative, and unforgettable. The courtroom was packed on the day of the trial. Reporters filled the back rows, their cameras clicking as they snapped photos of everyone who entered. Members of the public sat shoulder to shoulder, some wearing shirts that supported Maria, others holding signs in defense of Jack. The atmosphere was tense, like a storm waiting to break. Maria arrived early, dressed in her military uniform. She walked with purpose, her head held high, but those who knew her well could see the exhaustion in her eyes. The past few months had been grueling, emotionally, mentally, and physically. Yet here she was, ready to face the man who had pointed a gun at her and the system that had allowed it to happen. Jack, on the other hand, looked pale and uneasy as he entered the room. His lawyer, Mr. Paul Grayson, patted him on the shoulder and whispered something meant to reassure him, but Jack didn't seem convinced. He glanced around nervously, avoiding eye contact with anyone. When his gaze accidentally met Maria's, he quickly looked away, unable to hold her steady stare. The judge, a stern woman named Judge Margaret Ellis, called the court to order. "This case concerns the actions of Officer Jack Miller on the evening of October 12th, she began, her voice firm and clear. "The prosecution alleges that Officer Miller committed aggravated assault with a deadly weapon against Lieutenant Colonel Maria Alvarez. Let us proceed." The prosecution went first. They presented evidence, the viral video, witness testimonies, and records of previous complaints against Jack. One by one, people took the stand to describe instances where Jack had acted aggressively or unfairly toward minorities. Each story painted a picture of a man who used his authority to intimidate rather than protect. Maria testified next. Her voice wavered slightly at first, but she quickly found her rhythm, speaking clearly and confidently about what had happened that night. "I wasn't doing anything wrong," she said, looking directly at the jury. "I was standing there minding my own business when Officer Miller approached me. He didn't listen when I explained who I was. Instead, he pulled his gun and pointed it at me. And yes, he made comments about my ethnicity. It was humiliating and frightening. When it was Jack's turn to testify, he struggled. His answers were short and defensive, often contradicting earlier statements he'd given during the investigation. Under cross-examination, the prosecutor pressed him hard, asking why he hadn't followed proper protocol or considered alternative explanations before drawing his weapon. Jack stammered, trying to justify his actions, but his arguments sounded weak even to his own ears. After days of testimony, closing arguments, and deliberation, the jury returned with a verdict: guilty. The courtroom erupted into murmurs. Some cheered quietly. Others shook their heads in disappointment. Judge Ellis sentenced Jack to 3 years in prison, emphasizing the importance of accountability within law enforcement. For Jack, hearing the sentence felt like a punch to the gut. 3 years. It seemed impossible. As the bailiff led him out of the courtroom in handcuffs, he caught one last glimpse of Maria. She sat still, her expression unreadable. Whether it was relief, anger, or sadness, he couldn't tell. Life inside the state penitentiary was harsh. Jack shared a cell with Marcus Dunn, a tall, muscular man in his late 30s who had been convicted of embezzlement, a non-violent crime that landed him behind bars for 5 years. At first, Marcus kept to himself, observing Jack silently, while sizing him up. Jack too avoided conversation, preferring to lie on his bunk and stare at the ceiling. But silence didn't last long. One evening after dinner, Marcus broke the ice. "So you're the cop, huh?" he asked casually, leaning against the wall. Jack stiffened. "Yeah, what about it?" Marcus shrugged. "Just curious. You don't look like most cops I've seen." "What's that supposed to mean?" Jack snapped, defensive. "Nothing bad," Marcus replied calmly. "You just seem lost, like you don't belong here." Jack didn't respond. He rolled onto his side, facing the wall. Lost? Maybe Marcus was right, but admitting it felt too painful. Over time, however, the two men began talking more. Marcus shared stories about his life before prison, how he'd worked as a mechanic, how he'd gotten caught up in financial trouble because of bad decisions. In return, Jack opened up cautiously, revealing bits and pieces of his own story. He talked about growing up in Willow Creek, joining the police force to make a difference, and feeling increasingly disillusioned as the years went by. "You ever think maybe you got so caught up in being the law that you forgot to be human?" Marcus asked one day. Jack frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means sometimes we get so focused on rules and power that we forget people are people. Sounds like that's what happened with you and that soldier lady." Jack didn't answer. He lay awake that night, thinking about Marcus's words. Was that true? Had he really stopped seeing people as individuals? The thought unsettled him. Meanwhile, outside the prison walls, Maria continued her work. She threw herself into advocacy, traveling to nearby towns to speak about racial bias and the need for reform in law enforcement. Her speeches resonated with many, especially young people eager to make a difference. Yet despite her outward success, Maria carried a weight inside her, a mix of lingering fear, frustration, and unresolved anger. Her friend Ryan noticed the toll it was taking. "You can't keep carrying all this alone," he told her one evening after a particularly draining event. "Talk to someone. Get help if you need it." Maria hesitated. She'd always prided herself on being strong, on handling things on her own. But maybe Ryan was right. Maybe she needed to let someone in. With encouragement from Ryan and Colonel Hayes, Maria started seeing a counselor. Dr. Laura Bennett, no relation to Jack's former captain, listened patiently as Maria unpacked her emotions. At first, Maria resisted, brushing off her feelings as minor inconveniences. But over time, she began to open up, confronting the fear and vulnerability she'd buried deep inside. "I never thought I'd feel unsafe in my own country," Maria admitted during one session. "Not like that. Not with a gun pointed at me." Dr. Bennett nodded. "It's okay to feel angry, scared, or hurt. Those emotions are valid. What matters is how you choose to move forward." Maria took those words to heart. Slowly, she began to heal. Therapy gave her tools to process her trauma, and her advocacy work provided a sense of purpose. She realized that while she couldn't change the past, she could use her experience to create a better future for herself and others. Back in prison, Jack faced challenges of his own. Adjusting to life behind bars wasn't easy. Many inmates resented him simply because he was a former police officer. Guards treated him coldly, viewing him as a disgrace to their profession. Even meals became opportunities for tension, as inmates whispered insults or glared at him across the cafeteria, but Marcus stood by him. When other prisoners tried to provoke Jack, Marcus stepped in, using his imposing frame to deter troublemakers. "Leave him alone," Marcus would say, his tone leaving no room for argument. Over time, Jack earned a fragile kind of respect, not because he demanded it, but because he worked hard and kept his head down. Working in the prison's maintenance crew gave Jack a sense of routine. Every day he cleaned floors, fixed broken furniture, and helped keep the facility running smoothly. It was manual labor far removed from the authority he once wielded as a police officer, yet there was a strange satisfaction in it, a reminder that he could contribute without relying on power or intimidation. Letters from his wife, Lisa, arrived sporadically. In them, she expressed a mix of anger and concern. "You need to take responsibility for what you did," she wrote in one letter. "If you want to fix things, you have to start by admitting you were wrong." Jack read those words over and over, letting them sink in. Admitting fault wasn't easy. It went against everything he believed about himself. But Lisa's letters reminded him that he still had people who cared about him, people who wanted him to change. As the months passed, Jack began to reflect more deeply on his actions. He thought about Maria, wondering how she was coping. Did she hate him? Did she forgive him? He doubted he'd ever know, but imagining her strength and resilience inspired him to try harder, to be better, even in small ways. By the end of his second year in prison, Jack had changed. He wasn't the same man who had walked into the courtroom 2 years earlier. He was quieter, humbler, and more willing to listen. While he still struggled with guilt and regret, he also felt a glimmer of hope, a belief that redemption might be possible, however difficult the journey. Outside the prison walls, Maria continued to inspire change. Her advocacy efforts gained momentum, drawing attention from lawmakers and activists alike. She became a symbol of resilience, proving that even in the face of injustice, courage and determination could spark meaningful progress. Though their paths remained separate, both Jack and Maria were learning valuable lessons. For Jack, it was about accountability and growth. For Maria, it was about healing and empowerment. Neither knew it yet, but their journeys were far from over, and their stories would intersect again in ways neither could predict. Jack's release from prison came sooner than expected. After serving 2 years of his 3-year sentence, he became eligible for parole. The parole board reviewed his case carefully, weighing his behavior in prison, letters of support from his family, and statements from fellow inmates like Marcus Dunn. Jack sat nervously in front of the panel, his hands clasped tightly together as they questioned him. "Mr. Miller," one of the board members began, "do you believe your actions on the night of October 12th were justified?" Jack hesitated, swallowing hard. He had rehearsed this moment countless times in his head, but now that it was here, the words felt heavy on his tongue. "No, sir," he finally said, his voice low but steady. "I was wrong. I let my anger and prejudices get the better of me. It wasn't about protecting anyone. It was about control, and I regret that." The room fell silent. Jack glanced at the board members, searching their faces for any sign of approval or disapproval. Finally, the chairperson spoke. "We've seen evidence of your efforts to improve yourself while incarcerated. Your conduct has been acceptable, and several individuals have vouched for your character. We're granting you parole under strict conditions. Do you understand what that means?" "Yes, ma'am," Jack replied quickly, relief washing over him. "I'll follow every rule. I won't mess this up." With those words, Jack walked out of the facility a free man, or at least freer than he'd been in years. But freedom didn't mean an end to his struggles. Returning to Willow Creek felt surreal. The town hadn't changed much, but Jack knew he wasn't the same person who had left it behind. Everywhere he went, people stared. Some whispered behind their hands. Others crossed the street to avoid him. A few gave him nods of acknowledgement, though these gestures were rare. His first stop after leaving prison was home, or what was left of it. Lisa, his wife, greeted him with a mixture of caution and hope. Their marriage had survived only because of her determination to see him through his sentence. She hugged him briefly, then stepped back, folding her arms across her chest. "You look different," she said softly. "I feel different," Jack admitted. "It's not going to be easy, but I want to make things right, starting with us." Lisa nodded, though skepticism lingered in her eyes. "We'll see, Jack. One step at a time." Rebuilding his life proved harder than Jack anticipated. Finding a job was nearly impossible. Employers either recognized his name from the news or dismissed him outright when they learned about his criminal record. Desperation set in until Sam Turner, a no-nonsense foreman at a local construction company, offered him a chance. "I don't care about your past," Sam told him during the interview. "What I care about is whether you can show up on time. Work hard and keep your mouth shut. Can you do that?" Jack nodded vigorously. "Yes, sir. You won't regret giving me a shot." True to his word, Jack threw himself into the work. Days spent hauling materials, operating machinery, and fixing damaged structures gave him purpose. His co-workers initially kept their distance, wary of associating with someone labeled a racist ex-cop. Over time, however, Jack earned their respect, not by talking about his transformation, but by proving himself reliable and willing to learn. One afternoon, during a break, a younger worker named Danny approached him. "Hey, I heard about what happened," Danny said awkwardly. "Not just the trial, but before that, the stuff with the soldiers. People say you've changed. Is that true?" Jack met Danny's gaze, feeling the weight of the question. "Yeah, it's true," he said honestly. "I'm not proud of who I used to be, but I'm trying to be better, that's all I can do." Danny studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Good enough for me. Small victories like that helped." Jack rebuilt his confidence. Still, reintegrating into society wasn't without its challenges. Some townsfolk refused to forgive him, accusing him of faking remorse to win sympathy. Others pitied him, treating him like a lost cause. Through it all, Jack reminded himself of Marcus's advice. Focus on being human, not perfect. While Jack worked to piece his life back together, Maria continued her mission to bridge gaps between communities. Her advocacy expanded beyond military-police relations to address broader issues of systemic inequality. She partnered with local organizations, schools, and churches to host workshops and dialogues aimed at fostering understanding and collaboration. Her efforts weren't always welcomed. At one town hall meeting, a man stood up and shouted, "You think bashing cops is going to solve anything? They risk their lives every day." Maria remained calm, responding with patience. "This isn't about bashing anyone. It's about accountability and mutual respect. Police officers have a tough job, but so do civilians. If we don't talk openly about our differences, how will we ever move forward?" Her words resonated with many attendees, sparking meaningful conversations. Yet criticism followed her wherever she went. Online trolls harassed her relentlessly, accusing her of seeking fame or revenge. Some even sent threatening messages, warning her to stay in her lane. Despite the hostility, Maria refused to back down. Therapy had taught her how to manage her fears, and Ryan's unwavering support gave her strength. One evening, after a particularly draining event, Maria found herself sitting alone in her car, staring at the dashboard. Tears welled up in her eyes as she replayed moments from the past few years. The confrontation with Jack, the trial, the countless hours spent advocating for change. For all her progress, she still carried scars. Would she ever truly feel safe again? Ryan knocked on her window, startling her. He grinned sheepishly and motioned for her to roll it down. "Thought I'd find you here," he said. "Come on. Let's grab dinner." Maria hesitated, then nodded. "Okay." Over burgers and fries, Ryan listened as she poured out her frustrations. "Sometimes I wonder if anything I'm doing actually matters," she confessed. "People cheer me on, but they don't really understand how exhausting it is. How lonely." Ryan reached across the table, placing a hand on hers. "You matter, Maria. Every speech you give, every workshop you lead, it makes a difference. Maybe not right away, but eventually. Change takes time." Maria smiled faintly. "Thanks, Ryan. I needed to hear that." As months passed, Jack and Maria remained unaware of how closely their paths were converging. Both were working toward redemption in their own ways, driven by guilt and responsibility. Jack volunteered at a community center, mentoring troubled teens and sharing lessons he'd learned in prison. Maria collaborated with law enforcement agencies, pushing for reforms that prioritized de-escalation training and cultural sensitivity. Their separate journeys intersected unexpectedly when Maria announced plans to host a public forum titled Bridging, divides conversations about race, power, and accountability. The event aimed to bring together citizens, police officers, and military personnel to discuss shared challenges and solutions. Invitations went out to various stakeholders, including former adversaries. Jack received his invitation via mail. Holding the card in his hands, he felt a surge of anxiety. Attending meant facing people who despised him, and possibly Maria herself. Could he handle that? Should he even try? Lisa noticed his hesitation and encouraged him. "You've come. So far, Jack, don't let fear stop you now. Go, listen, learn." Taking a deep breath, Jack RSVP'd yes. On the day of the forum, the venue buzzed with energy. Attendees filled rows of chairs, their conversations blending into a hum of anticipation. Maria took the stage, welcoming everyone with a warm smile. "Thank you all for being here today," she began. "This isn't about pointing fingers or assigning blame. It's about finding common ground and building trust. Together, we can create a future where everyone feels valued and respected." Applause rippled through the crowd. Jack sat near the back, his heart pounding as he scanned the room. When his turn came to speak, he rose slowly, walking to the microphone. Silence fell as he cleared his throat. "I'm not here to defend my actions," Jack started, his voice trembling slightly. "What I did was wrong, and I'll carry that shame for the rest of my life. But I am here to apologize, to Lieutenant Colonel Alvarez, to the community, and to anyone else I hurt. I hope someday you'll believe me when I say I'm sorry." Maria watched him from the front row, her expression unreadable. As Jack returned to his seat, she stepped up to the mic once more. "Apologies are important," she said, looking directly at him. "But actions speak louder than words. Let's hold each other accountable, not out of vengeance, but out of love for our communities." The audience erupted in applause, bridging the gap between them for the first time. Though neither Jack nor Maria could predict the future, they both understood that healing required effort, humility, and courage. And for the first time in years, they felt hopeful. The days following the forum were unlike anything Jack had experienced before. For the first time in years, he felt a glimmer of connection, not just to the community, but to himself. The weight of guilt still lingered, but it was lighter now, tempered by the sense that he might actually be able to make amends. People didn't rush to embrace him or call him a hero, but some began to acknowledge his efforts. A few even thanked him for showing up and speaking honestly. One such person was Mrs. Harper, an elderly woman who ran the local library where Jack sometimes volunteered. She approached him after a book sorting session, her hands clasped tightly around a stack of novels. "I saw you at that meeting," she said softly. "What you said, it took guts. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Jack blinked, surprised by her words. "Thank you, ma'am, that means a lot." Mrs. Harper nodded firmly. "Keep doing what you're doing. It's not easy, but it matters." Her encouragement stayed with him, fueling his determination to keep moving forward. He started attending more community events, listening to people's stories and learning about their struggles. At first, he mostly observed, unsure of how to contribute. But as weeks turned into months, he found ways to help, whether it was mentoring kids at the youth center, organizing food drives, or simply lending an ear to someone who needed to talk. Meanwhile, Maria continued her advocacy work, traveling to neighboring towns and cities to share her message of reconciliation and reform. Her schedule was grueling, often leaving her exhausted, but she refused to slow down. Each speech, each workshop, and each conversation brought her closer to the change she envisioned. A world where fear and prejudice no longer dictated how people treated one another. Still, there were moments when doubt crept in. Late at night, lying awake in bed, Maria would replay the incident with Jack over and over again. Had she forgiven him? Could she ever truly forgive someone who had made her feel so vulnerable? These questions haunted her, but they also pushed her to dig deeper into her own emotions. Therapy had helped her process much of her trauma, but forgiveness remained elusive. Ryan noticed her internal struggle during one of their regular check-ins. "You've done incredible work, Maria," he said gently. But I think you're holding on to something. Maybe it's time to let go. Maria frowned, shaking her head. I don't know if I can. Forgiveness feels like giving him a free pass. Ryan leaned back in his chair, considering her words. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting or excusing what happened. It means releasing the hold it has on you. You deserve peace, Maria. Not just for yourself, but so you can keep inspiring others. His advice resonated with her, though putting it into practice wasn't easy. Over the next few weeks, Maria tried to shift her perspective. Instead of focusing solely on Jack's actions, she reminded herself of the progress she'd witnessed since the trial. Communities were coming together. Conversations that once seemed impossible were happening. Change was slow, but it was real. Spring gave way to summer. Willow Creek prepared for its annual Unity Festival, a celebration designed to bring residents of all backgrounds together. This year, the event carried extra significance, thanks in part to Maria's influence. She agreed to deliver the keynote speech, while organizers invited Jack to participate in a panel discussion about rebuilding trust between law enforcement and civilians. When Jack received the invitation, he hesitated, speaking publicly still. Terrified him, especially in front of people who might judge him harshly. But Lisa urged him to accept. This is your chance to show people you're serious about change, she said. Don't waste it. With trembling hands, Jack RSVP'd. Yes. The day of the festival arrived, bright and sunny. Booths lined Main Street, offering everything from homemade crafts to cultural foods. Music played in the background as families wandered through the crowd, laughing and chatting. Despite lingering tensions, there was a palpable sense of hope in the air. Maria stood backstage, pacing nervously as she reviewed her notes. Her heart raced not because she doubted her ability to speak, but because she knew how important this moment was. When the MC introduced her, she stepped onto the stage to thunderous applause. Thank you all for being here today, she began, her voice steady, despite her nerves. Unity isn't just a word. It's a choice. It's choosing to see each other as human beings, flaws and all. It's choosing to listen even when it's hard. And it's choosing to believe that we're stronger together than we are apart. Her words struck a chord with the audience, earning cheers and nods of agreement. As she wrapped up her speech, she glanced toward the panelists seated nearby, including Jack. Their eyes met briefly, and for the first time, there was no hostility, only understanding. Later, during the panel discussion, Jack found himself seated alongside former police officers, activists, and community leaders. The moderator posed tough questions. How do we rebuild trust? What role does accountability play? And perhaps most challenging of all, can forgiveness coexist with justice? When it was Jack's turn to respond, he took a deep breath. I don't expect anyone to forgive me, he admitted. What I did was wrong, and I'll live with that for the rest of my life. But I'm here because I want to learn. I want to understand how I can be part of the solution instead of the problem. His honesty earned murmurs of approval from the crowd. Even some skeptics softened, recognizing the sincerity in his tone. After the panel ended, Maria approached him cautiously. That was brave, she said, her voice neutral. Jack swallowed hard, unsure of what to say. Thank you for letting me be here. I know I don't deserve it. Maria studied him for a moment, then offered a small smile. Maybe not yet, but maybe someday. In the weeks that followed, Jack and Maria crossed paths occasionally, at community meetings, volunteer events, and town hall discussions. Neither sought out the other, but their interactions grew less awkward and more genuine. They weren't friends exactly, but they shared a mutual respect born from pain and perseverance. For Jack, these encounters reinforced his commitment to change. He realized that redemption wasn't a destination, it was a journey. Every kind, word, every act of service, and every effort to connect brought him closer to becoming the person he wanted to be. Maria, too, found solace in their evolving dynamic. Forgiveness didn't come overnight. but it became easier to imagine a future where she and Jack could stand side by side, not as adversaries but as allies. As autumn leaves began to fall, marking another season of growth and reflection, both Jack and Maria understood that their stories were far from over. The road ahead would remain difficult, filled with challenges and uncertainties. But for the first time they faced it not as individuals burdened by guilt and anger, but as part of a larger movement toward healing and unity. And in that shared purpose, they discovered something unexpected: hope. Hope that wounds could heal, bridges could be rebuilt, and hearts could open, even in a world that often seemed divided beyond repair. Daniel stood outside the construction site on a chilly morning, his breath visible in the crisp air. He adjusted the hard hat on his head and tightened the strap under his chin. It had been 2 months since he was released from prison, and this job was the first real opportunity he'd had to rebuild his life. The owner of the company, a man named Greg, was an old friend of Kevin's. When Kevin had called Greg and explained Daniel's situation, Greg had reluctantly agreed to give him a chance. Daniel knew he couldn't afford to mess this up. At first, the other workers were wary of him. Word spread quickly about who he was and what he'd done. Some avoided him altogether, while others made snide comments when they thought he wasn't listening. But Daniel kept his head down and focused on the work. He showed up early every day, stayed late, and did everything he was asked without complaint. Slowly, some of the men began to soften toward him. They saw that he was trying, even if they didn't fully trust him yet. During lunch breaks, Daniel often sat alone, eating a sandwich he'd packed that morning. One day, a younger worker named Ryan approached him. Ryan was new to the crew and didn't know much about Daniel's past. "Mind if I sit here?" Ryan asked, holding up his own lunch bag. Daniel hesitated for a moment but then nodded. "Sure," he said gruffly. As they ate, Ryan started talking about his weekend plans, a fishing trip with his buddies. Daniel listened quietly, nodding occasionally. For the first time in years, he felt a flicker of something he hadn't felt in a long time: normalcy. After a few minutes, Ryan glanced at him and smiled. "You don't talk much, do you?" he said lightly. Daniel shrugged. "Not much to say," he replied. But deep down, he appreciated the effort Ryan was making. Meanwhile, Aaron Blake was packing boxes in his living room. His promotion to full colonel meant a transfer to Washington, D.C., where he would be working on military policy reform. Michelle and Emily were excited about the move, though Aaron felt a mix of emotions. Leaving Oak Ridge meant leaving behind the place where so much had happened, both good and bad. Aaron walked outside and stood on the front porch, looking at the quiet street. This was where it had all started, 3 years ago. He remembered the night vividly, the sound of Daniel Harper's voice, the cold metal of the gun pointed at him, the fear that had gripped him as he realized how quickly things could have gone wrong. Shaking his head, Aaron took a deep breath. He couldn't change the past, but he could use it to shape the future. Before they left town, Aaron decided to visit the exact spot where the incident had occurred. He drove there one evening, parking his car a few blocks away and walking the rest of the distance. The streetlights cast long shadows on the pavement, and the neighborhood was eerily quiet. Aaron stopped at the corner where Daniel had confronted him. He stared at the ground, lost in thought. A woman walking her dog passed by and gave him a curious look. Aaron smiled politely and nodded. As she disappeared around the corner, he turned back to the empty street. So much had changed since that night. The protests, the trial, the national attention. It had all forced people to confront uncomfortable truths about race and power. But Aaron knew the work wasn't over. There were still too many places like Oak Ridge, too many people unwilling to see the harm caused by prejudice. He pulled out his phone and snapped a photo of the street. It was a reminder of how far he'd come, but also of how much farther he needed to go. Putting the phone back in his pocket, Aaron walked back to his car. Tomorrow he would start a new chapter, not just for himself but for his family and the countless others counting on him to make a difference. Back in Oak Ridge, Daniel continued to attend counseling sessions with Dr. Laura Bennett. At first, he had gone because the court ordered him to, but now he chose to keep coming. Something about Laura's calm demeanor made it easier for him to open up, even when the conversations were difficult. One afternoon, they sat in her office, the soft hum of a fan filling the silence. "How are things going at work?" Laura asked, leaning forward slightly. Daniel rubbed the back of his neck. "Better," he admitted. "Some of the guys are starting to warm up to me." Laura nodded encouragingly. "That's good to hear. And how about your thoughts? Have you noticed any changes in how you view people?" Daniel hesitated. He wanted to say yes, to tell her that he was different now, but the truth was more complicated. "I'm trying," he said finally. "But sometimes, I catch myself thinking the same way I used to. Like, when I see someone who looks different from me, or who acts differently, my first instinct is still to judge them." Laura didn't seem surprised. "Change takes time," she said gently. "The important thing is that you're aware of those thoughts and willing to challenge them. That's progress," Daniel sighed. "I guess so, it's just hard. People don't forget what you've done, you know? Even if you're trying to be better, they still see you as the guy who screwed up." "That's true," Laura agreed. "But you can't control how others perceive you. What you can control is your actions moving forward. Every day is a new opportunity to prove that you're capable of growth." Her words stuck with Daniel long after the session ended. On his drive home, he replayed them in his mind, wondering if he really believed them. Was he capable of change? Or was he destined to carry the weight of his mistakes forever? As the weeks turned into months, both Daniel and Aaron found themselves reflecting on the paths they had taken. For Daniel, each small victory, whether it was earning a coworker's respect or resisting a prejudiced thought, felt like a step in the right direction. He knew he had a long way to go, but for the first time in years he felt hopeful. For Aaron, the move to DC marked the beginning of a new mission. In his new role, he worked alongside policymakers, activists, and community leaders to address systemic issues within law enforcement. It was challenging work, but it was also deeply rewarding. Whenever he doubted himself, he thought about the people who had supported him during the trial, the strangers who had marched in the streets, the journalists who had told his story, and the friends and family who had stood by him through it. All one evening, as Aaron sat in his new office reviewing documents, his phone buzzed. It was a text from Michelle. "Proud of you." He smiled softly and set the phone aside. Despite everything, he felt grateful for the lessons he'd learned, for the love of his family, and for the chance to make a difference. In Oak Ridge, Daniel climbed into bed after another long day at work. As he lay there staring at the ceiling, he thought about the road ahead. It wouldn't be easy, but maybe, just maybe, he could find a way to live with himself again. With that thought, he closed his eyes and drifted off to sleep. Though their lives had taken very different turns, both men carried the scars of the past with them. But they also carried something else, a glimmer of hope, however fragile, that the world could be a better place if enough people were willing to try. And in that hope, they found the strength to keep moving forward.